for me, that was earth-shaking experience, as you can imagine. It's like, wow. As I couldn't, for the most part, consult with people, but because certainly no one had any sense of what we might call truly gay-centered. There might have been in the hippie world a certain kind of diffuse affirmativeness, we might call it. Up to a point could be affirmative. So my mother had remarried for the third time when I was 13 also, so I gained a father again. And that father had a sister named Estella. She was very, very radical for that time and place, and leftist and into kooky things, kooky cultural things. She was young, but straight woman. And at that time, she was involved with this bisexual man, Sai, who was a short, little, pudgy, not fat guy, who was into jazz. Super, super. He wasn't like into it in the thinking way like a scholar would be. He was like, and he wasn't a jazz artist. He loved jazz and knew many, many of the people in jazz, but was not himself a jazz player. That was like Sai was his name. I could turn to them, so they weren't gay people. But Estelle could be supportive enough to say, well, you should try and get a better support when she quit with this guy. I wasn't ready to go cold turkey, so to speak, in terms of what the support therapist can provide. And so it was suggested I try the counseling service at UCLA. And I just happened coincidentally to get this Chinese woman who was a serious Rogerian. She was the one. I walked in the door and she was inside at the intake desk. That's the way they worked it. She took me. She said, I'll take you. And I would meet her during lunch on UCLA. This is in that last half year after I quit this guy, before I transferred. It was an interim period. During that period I first had touched another man's penis. I'd never touched another man's penis up to that point. Which is another huge earth-shaking experience for me to have. Relating over lunch once a week with this lady, this Rogerian old, she was about 65 years old, originally Chinese woman. I remember the first meeting I had with her, we would walk in, there was a garden area on the north part of the campus with sculptures, and we would sit there and she would eat some lunch stuff and talk. And I remember the first meeting, she told me the story of when she was a little girl, and she was in China, she was raised in mainland China when she was a little girl. And she told me the story that she'd been brought on this train because her father had to do her father was part of the diplomatic corps of the Chinese government, whatever government that was at the time. And they had to go on the train of a warlord, and the warlord was fighting on the front of some battle. At that time, China had civil war battles, fronts of struggle between different groups, subgroups. And she had to go on the train, and she mentioned that they had to sit there waiting while the warlord got dressed to meet them. And they went in an anteroom on this train car, which was just positioned on the track by itself. And they sat there, and after they had to sit there for a while, the door opened and a very handsome man walked past them in a beautiful silk robe, very casually. And then walked out of that car into some other car, into some other activity was available on that part of the train, I guess. And she said to me, that was what was so interesting. Everyone understood that this was the general's favorite boy, the kind of boy that he would take on this kind of journey. He wouldn't take a female equivalent. It wasn't that the general necessarily was gay, but rather that this was the culture in which this existed for a person of his class and power. And he could do that if he wanted to, if that was his taste. And it was not thought of in any other way than that by the observers. And she wanted to convey that to me because that was a culture in which homosexuality, she said, was very differently seen than the way I'd been raised. Mm-hmm. She might find that really interesting for me to try and appreciate that gradually, though, she wasn't pushy about it. She was suggesting that if I allowed myself to be homosexual and all the whatever cultural attitudes, even the ones she was sharing, just a different cultural tradition, I was free for all the cultural attitudes. I could then be homosexual in a way that was right for me and my actual experience in the here and now. And maybe there was something about that that was worth that. That had never occurred to me. I was really grateful to be exposed to that possibility. I mean, it may have been bubbling under the surface, and my pursuit of one way or another would eventually open me out to that. But I wanted to follow that out. I really did want to follow out that kind of vision that I saw. After a few months more with her, I've been transferred to UC Berkeley, which is Berkeley compared to UCLA at that time. I'm talking the second half of 1971. This is to be homosexual. This is the era the coquettes are fading, gone, into the lighter economy. It's the city in San Francisco culture, if you know, the fed culture, the young gay culture of the era. But it was a big scene, I mean, in terms of a huge alternate world. A world that was opposed to the system, underbelly of the system, but actively opposed to the system. Was very busy at that time. That's when I transferred to Berkeley. But yeah, I found it personally very hard to struggle with the places in personally that didn't want me to be fully gay. Didn't want me to open up to that. I had to go through that process of struggling with those parts of myself. That's a big part of what led me to this. I didn't want to open up my body, even though I wanted to be homosexual then. If I wasn't going to repress it, I was going to open up with it. But that didn't mean I was really wanting to then as an intellectual idea. I didn't know about that. There were no gay bathhouses. There were places known to be popular with gay folks. But there's nothing like what we would call gay bathhouses. There's no gay anything outside this very limited area, this homophile area, Harry and his successors had carved out in this little area of the group thing. But then there was nothing gay, even into the early 70s. It was like this. Wow. Oh, I was not thinking that way, so it didn't occur to me. I was still very much opposed to the body and all that. It was only because I was such a busy activist and interested in the psychology of this. Even though I quit that when I moved up here, I couldn't be just a person. Right away, I had to become an activist again. Right? And that was the cutting edge at that time, was what we might call non-hetero liberation. Berkeley was all abuzz with it when I transferred up there in the fall, 1970, summer of 1971. Berkeley was all abuzz with this energy. So by the beginning of 1972, I was one of the co-founders of the first men's bisexual organization. We met regularly in a church across the street from UC campus. We consider this very advanced and very progressive. And I saw what it was like to be what I thought were my photos. That was very embarrassing. I was so dishonest with myself. I still could not accept myself. It took more struggle than that. It was a way to cover over being gay. Not so for the others necessarily. I'm not saying that. I'm trying to imply that. But it was for me. See, I'm trying to be me with this kind of stuff. And that's not being useful. That's not being helpful for me. I'm not being personally fulfilled good enough to be with this bisexual group. Okay. Simultaneous with the founding of this group, another group was founded with on purpose because I was, again, privately to myself, too cowardly to join. Okay. Was a over-gay group. Historically, it was not the first overtly homosexual group in Berkeley. Okay. But by the time it started, the earlier stuff had all faded away. Believe it or not, that was all forgotten. There had been an earlier movement of people trying to be gay, even earlier than this organization. But by the time I came along, like I'm describing to you, that was already just an early attempt that had been forgotten by that time. But there were folks who wanted to be more purely homosexual than this bi thing. So they became the Gay Men's Collective of Berkeley Free Clinic. It sounds like it was just all the people, all the members of the Free Clinic were collectives of different interests. It was a women's collective, eventually be a lesbian collective, all kinds of everything was organized that kind of way. Okay, I joined them. I didn't want to be a hidden kid anymore. And wow, what a difference it was. You have to imagine a time. So we did various activities as a collective of gay men around the basement of a church. Okay, we provided counseling for guys who were confused about this or had family issues about this. We provided a phone service. People in a panic or needed to just talk on the phone, could call in, so we manned the phone line. But our main event was a meeting, a weekly community meeting every damn week. We met in the basement of another church, not the church where the free clinic was. We originally met there. It got too big. If you can picture 100 men showing up without any advertising, regular, week after week after week after week, spontaneously, I tell you. So when I gave in, so to speak, okay, I had about 4 or 5 months in the bisexual, helping operate the bisexual folks stuff. And before I realized my own hypocrisy wouldn't allow me to keep going that way, and I joined the gay men's collective. So I had to walk around. Originally, they were getting like about 30 to 35 folks by that time. At that point, that would have been maybe May or June of 1972. If you can picture that. Spontaneously, no one's advertising anything. Just on a Friday night. This is that particular Friday night. Later on, being other formats, maybe I had to walk around the block. I couldn't just walk in while they did their thing. I had to walk around. I was terribly ashamed, but I made myself go in eventually and join in. At that point, they broke in the big group down into just little groups, where you were in a little group with the facilitator and you shared your experience about whatever the theme was. They broke down into different themes, like coming out to your family, or issues with your boss, or work, or whatnot, or whatever it was. That's the first time I was there, and I just joined one of the groups and participated as a participant, but afterwards I introduced myself. They kind of knew who I was, anyway, and kind of knew who they were at that point, but I introduced myself, and I requested that I join the collective that put on the activities. That began that, okay? So I began to join them. We put on the Friday things, I would man the telephone, I would be providing we call it rap counseling. If people wanted to set up times, we would make times available for that around the issue of learning to be accepting rather than rejecting of one's homosexuality. That was really great because there was a lot of interest in that, a lot of guys are coming, and more and more. You have to kind of picture this thing. That's why right away I had to move out of the basement of this one church because there wasn't enough room. We had to go to this whole other church because it was a bigger facility. They had a bigger meeting space, and they had more room to break down into like little groups that would work on different people's interests in smaller space, a more intimate space. Because people just doing that. You have to picture at this time, even the most let's call it gay bar in Berkeley, where I was at that time. It's called the White Horse. For those of you who might be familiar with it. It was still being raided by police. It was still against the law, even though it had to be fought all the way to the Supreme Court. You have to picture how awful and difficult it was to struggle against that. Not by contrast to say now we can all be okay. If we've given a chance to be okay now, it's to take advantage of that. That's what I found out. It's to go someplace with the freedom granted. It's not merely to imitate our oppressors and the people who've produced us physically and the people who've raised us into a culture that merely imitates that. And that's a big challenge. I can't picture anything more challenging for a person to handle, and especially for any of you who tried to do that, to stand against the way that the system is set up, to personally try and be a different kind of way. And now, when we don't have any kind of culture and any tradition that supports that in a homosexually upfront, honest way, it's been destroyed. It's all been destroyed. We were from another culture, another time and place, would be different. We'd have different experience of these questions. It would come out in different ways, I suggest. I'm suggesting that folks we now call gay identified, homosexual identified, have always been a part of the human variety of being.